Okay, Emmett, Dunleavy, thank you ever so much for joining us today. I think, as I said earlier, I was looking at your profile, and you know, you've got quite a comprehensive background over the with a 153, a 347, 800, 1500, and you're still going strong now. I think you're just over 30. So, and I think you tell me you ran a 24-minute 5 miler recently, 24:01. So you're healthy, you're happy, and hopefully life is good with you.
Yeah, well, I'm still going anyways. I don't know if I'm still going strong, but the times are beginning to slow down at this stage. But yeah, still competing. I had a major injury setback last year, but I'm actually just getting back fit again this year. But enjoying getting back running, and obviously with the coaching, there's quite a few athletes that I'm coaching that are at a fairly high level. It's nice on occasion to jump in with them and do some of their long runs and even some of their workouts with them as well. It gives you a nice insight when you're able to actually run with the group as well from time to time to see exactly what's going on within the training session.
Absolutely. I guess comparing their physiology to your physiology when you were at your best, and I guess there's lots of similarities. But I don't know, are there many differences, with some of the athletes you're coaching?
I mean, a lot of the I would have been very much a middle distance profile. Like, I mean, my PBs would have been sort of pretty healthy over 8, 1500, 5K. Which I think is actually helpful as a coach that you've ran those events. Like, I was competitive for the course of 15 years at senior level, so I have many seasons to go through where you ran a lot of races and you learned a lot from the training that worked. Went through a lot of the workouts that I would be prescribing for the athletes, and how the athletes should be feeling during those workouts. How the athletes recover and how many days recovery certain workouts will take. And I think, it's not essential that you were an athlete, that any coach was an athlete at a high level. I do think there is a certain benefit to it. The other, I suppose, the flip side of that is sometimes coaches will fall into the trap of prescribing a lot of what they done and what worked for them as an athlete, and end up prescribing that for other athletes. And I think that's, from my point of view, when I start coaching a new athlete, is trying to establish what their physiology is. Are they geared more towards the longer stuff? Are they more of a slow twitch athlete, or are they very much on the short end of things, and are they a fast twitch athlete? Establishing that physiology and tailoring the training to them, rather than just doing a cut and paste of what I've done during my own career, I think is useful. Gotcha.
Yeah. And you also say you find new technology in the running shoes, you're finding a benefit in those.
I think there's no doubt the shoes have changed things over the last couple of years, particularly over the longer distances. And if you look at the trends in the marathon, it's pretty clear and obvious that times have improved over the marathon distance, not just in Ireland, but I mean at global level. There's plenty of research and statistics to show that at this stage. The shoes clearly help in the racing scenarios. But I think just what we were chatting about beforehand, I think for athletes who struggle a little bit to recover in between harder, longer workouts, the shoes probably protect your legs a little bit more. They speed up that recovery process, and they allow you to get back to your next session or to your next race a little bit quicker than you would have historically. I know my own coach, Jerry Kiernan, and Jerry would have ran 2:12 for the marathon, and it's a conversation we often have around the shoes. Is Jerry would always have said that his biggest issue in marathons was that when he got to 20 mile or 22 mile, he would suffer a lot from muscle cramps, and he felt that it was just that wear and tear and muscle fatigue and muscle damage that had accumulated during the race and caught up with him in the last 4 to 6 miles. I mean, he would always speculate, if he had those shoes, who knows what he would have done over the marathon distance. But I think it's a good example of somebody who's, the two different eras, I suppose, is the era where those shoes weren't available to people, and now they're a new tool. Some people don't agree with them, but whether you agree with them or not, they're here to stay at this stage.
Yeah, you're right indeed. Yeah, I think something like, did it take about 24 years for them to improve about, was it a 1 minute to, I think, was it the 2:06, and then probably in the last 20 years, they've improved 6 or 7 minutes since then, which is a massive chunk.
Yeah, because I remember when I started in athletics, the world record was 2:07. I think, was it Densimo in Rotterdam that ran?
So I was thinking the guy from Debuti. Yeah.
And then Ronaldo da Costa, a Brazilian guy, ran 2:06. And that was a huge, because the world record hadn't moved in a long, long time. And then it came down to 2:06. And that was probably maybe early 2000s. I can't remember the exact year, maybe late 90s, early 2000s, but it's absolutely tumbled since then. And it's been highly correlated with the shoe technology as well in the last sort of 4 to 5 years.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll one of these days I'll try and pair myself, see what happens.
I'll try them on. You'll be surprised how fast you can run.
Yeah. Well, I'll slow down a lot, you know. So just getting to these questions, then, Emmett. Thinking about your coaching. As a coach, what are the main coach processes that you focus on when you're coaching your groups?
So I suppose the first thing is it's the old cliche when it comes to coaching, but consistency is the most important aspect of an athlete, of every year for an athlete, is that you've got to be running, for an athlete at a reasonably high level, you've got to be running consistently for 48 to 50 weeks of the year. You know, there are little down periods along the way, but generally speaking, goal number one is to make sure that the athlete is training consistently through the year and avoiding injuries where possible. So I suppose what feeds into that then is that the training is specific to them. So when I start working with an athlete, is the first thing we'll do is have a look at their physiology. So get some lactate testing done, try and establish what the athlete profile is, you know, whether they're a fast twitch, slow twitch, what training is likely to work for them or not work for them. Have a look at what they've done previously, so that if we're making any changes to the volume of training that they're doing, the type of workouts that they're doing, that we're not making those changes too quickly, because ultimately those spikes in volume, those spikes in intensity are what triggers off injuries. You know, they're probably the biggest factor in getting injured during the year. And then when I sit down to do the training plan, it's quite similar, is that you're looking for gradual progressions through the year, you know, looking at a periodized plan from September, October time, right round to most of the athletes that I'm coaching at a high level are looking at, they're track athletes. So they'll be looking to peak in, you know, May, June, July. And looking at that periodized year for 8, 9 months, 10 months, and making sure that your changes from one phase of training to the next are nice and smooth and gradual. And that ultimately that the training is specific to the athlete and it allows them to stay consistent and injury-free all year. Right.
Yeah. And I think there's a lot of people who compare with that and replicate a lot of what you're saying there. You talk about getting a profile of the athlete, looking at the fast twitch, slow twitch ratios. Are there any specific things that you'll do to ascertain that kind of information?
I mean, the standard lactate test, the step test, is what I would do with all athletes. Most people will be familiar with that. I would usually do the testing, if I'm doing it myself, I'll do some 5 to 6 minute stages on an outdoor track. Some of the athletes have access to the Institute of Sport, or they might have testing in their university, so they might do the testing on a treadmill, and they might be 3 or 4 minute stages. There is some slight difference between the protocols, but I think as long as athletes are comparing those protocols, as long as they're repeating the same protocol each time, then the data is comparable. So what I look at in that is you look at, you know, how high does the lactate, where's the base lactates in the early stages when the athlete is running easy, and then towards the end of the test is what sort of levels of lactate are they producing. And the higher the lactate, the higher correlation it is with a fast twitch athlete. So a real 800, 1500 meter athlete will be producing maybe 14, 15 millimole of lactate towards the end of the test. On the other end of the spectrum, if you've got an athlete who's pretty much flat out at the end of a test, but still only producing maybe 4 or 5 millimole of lactate, then you know they're predominantly slow twitch. They're ultimately going to be geared towards the longer distances and heading a career towards the marathon. So I suppose they're the two extreme ends of the spectrum. And you're looking for where does the athlete lie along that spectrum from fast to slow twitch. For most athletes, the majority of middle distance runners, they sit in the middle, and they've got a nice combination of fast and slow, but you do on occasion come across people at the extreme, and they need to be handled a little bit differently then. The other thing I would do is sometimes if I'm unsure of an athlete, is once we've done the test, I might take a 5 or 6 minute break and do something like a 600 meters all out or an 800 meters all out. And again, you're looking at, you know, rather than how fast they can run that, is you're looking at how much lactate can they produce at the end of that effort. And again, it kind of feeds into that idea of figuring out where the physiology is. Are they fast twitch or are they slow twitch?
Gotcha. Yeah, and that's quite a comprehensive way, and I think that'll be really good information for people that are less familiar with the lactate testing. And on the testing, is it always a maximal test, or do you sometimes do sub-maximal tests to project or guesstimate the lactate? Would that be something you'd do?
So, the standard protocol that I would use would be like I said, 5 stages of 5 to 6 minutes duration. The aim at the end of that is that the last effort is pretty much close to all out. So, but the previous 4 stages are getting progressively faster. So let's take an example. I mean, we would have done a test with some of the 5K guys about 3 weeks ago. They're running mid to low 14 minutes for 5K. Their first interval was at 6:30 per mile pace. Then they went to 6-minute mile pace. Then they went 5:40, 5:20, 5 minutes. And one of them went on then to run another repeat at about 4:45, 4:46 per mile pace. So that's pretty much close to maximum. So most of the intervals are sub-max, but then I like to add on one max effort or close to max effort towards the end. Again, just to see, you get an idea in terms of not only, well, if it's a repeat test, you know where the physiology is already, but it gives you a snapshot of where they are in terms of their anaerobic capacity at that given point in time as well. So at this time of the year, athletes wouldn't produce a high level of lactate towards the end of a test, whereas you would expect in April, May, June, if you were to repeat that test, the lactate levels towards the end are much higher because their anaerobic systems are much more developed at that point of the year.
Lovely. Got you there. And just one final point on that question. You'd say that somebody who produces particularly high levels of lactate, that you might treat them differently, or those people that look at the 18 or 22 millimoles of lactate. What kind of things might you do differently with athletes with such high levels of lactate?
So with athletes who are on that very fast end of the spectrum, they're predominantly 400, 800, or maybe 800, 1500 type athletes. Generally speaking, I would try and break up an awful lot of their threshold stuff and their interval work into smaller workouts. So they would accumulate the same amount of threshold work at the end of a session. So say both the main group and that athlete will aim to do 25 to 30 minutes worth of threshold work, whereas the main group might do something like 5 by 5 minutes of a minute recovery or 90-second recovery. If that athlete is very much on the fast twitch end, they might do something like 4 sets of 3 by 2 minutes. So you're breaking it into 2-minute intervals of maybe a 30 to 60-second break. But just because they produce so much lactate so fast, is that you need to keep stopping them regularly so that the lactate doesn't end up going too high. The other thing that I would do with some of the really fast twitch guys is they would actually go onto the track sometimes and do maybe something like sets of 300. So maybe like 5 by 300 and do 3 sets of it. So it's basically 15 by 300 meters, doing those at around about 5K pace off very short recoveries. And I've tested this out over the years, is if you're taking lactates at the end of each, maybe 4 or 5 reps, what you're looking for is that the lactate remains relatively steady through the session, that it's somewhere between maybe 4 to 6 millimoles. So effectively, they're getting a threshold stimulus, but coming at it in a different way. If you were to take the opposite end of that, is if you've got a real marathon guy, they might be able to do their threshold work. They could do 30 minutes continuous work because they're not producing that much lactate. They're able to handle that 30 minutes straight without taking any breaks at all. And again, it just plays to their physiology.
Yeah, that makes good sense. And the important thing is, as we share this with the club coaches around Ireland, that they'll pick up some key information which will hopefully help us bring through the next champions in Ireland and hopefully the world. But, thanks very much. Second question I've got here is, which areas are you focusing on as a coach to develop? So, we never stop learning as coaches. But yeah, which areas are you working on to improve as a coach these days?
So, I suppose the coach education is important. And actually, we just kicked off for level 3 last Friday night. So that's going to take up most of the next 12 to 18 months, and that'll be a primary focus in terms of, I suppose, the main aim of that level 3 course is that they're trying to produce coaches that can coach high performance athletes. So it's a high performance coach to coach a high performance athlete. So I suppose it's just going into a higher level of detail for athletes who are performing at major championships, at Europeans, World Championships and Olympic Games. And I'd like to think over the years, you'd love to be working with athletes at that level, and you'd like to be equipped to be able to manage them as best possible. So that's, I suppose, one area that I'm working on. I would always be reading up in literature and new research when it comes to, what the latest science is on endurance training in general, and not necessarily specifically to athletics. I'd always keep an eye on other sports like triathlon, cycling, swimming. It's good to challenge yourself with other sports, and you look at the workouts that they're doing, the type of sessions that they're doing, and just trying to think, well, what are they trying to achieve through that session? Are they training threshold? Are they training VO2 max? Are they looking at lactate tolerance? Whatever it might be, and then trying to transfer that back to athletics, and then how you might actually use those sessions within your own sport as well. I find Twitter is actually a great place for picking up information like that. If you follow the right people on Twitter, they tend to publish an awful lot of the new data and the new research. It's a great way of picking stuff up. And I suppose the other thing that I do every week is all the athletes that I coach, I send them a newsletter every Friday. And while obviously it's beneficial for them, I put 3 things into it. I put a little bit of news into it, I'll put one piece of information from Twitter into it, but I'll also take an article, review it myself, and put the sort of the summary and the key takeaways from that article into the newsletter. And it just, on a weekly basis, obviously the athletes are getting something out of it, but it also forces me to keep on top of whatever is happening in terms of research and new information that's coming out. And an awful lot of the time you find that research is just repeating stuff that's been done already. It's confirming stuff that you already know, but it's still good to get that confirmation. And from time to time you pick up something new, and it'll make you think, could you be doing things in a different way or doing things slightly better?
Right. Yeah, that's yeah. If you're keeping busy, you're definitely keeping ahead of the game and doing a great job. Good stuff. Thinking about your support crew, who are there? And who do you use to support your coaching in terms of? Well, I don't know.
Well, I have to say, my wife Jill is very supportive. First of all, because as you know yourself from coaching, it's a 24/7 pursuit. You're always on call. Athletes can get sick or injured or distressed at any time of the day or night. So you kind of have to be, you're always, available to them. So, she's very supportive of that. I suppose I've been involved in the sport as long as we've known each other. But at the same time, it's good to have somebody that understands what you're doing and is really supportive, which is great. Like in terms of people within the sport, my old coach, Jerry Kiernan, and prior to that, my old coach when I was as a club athlete was a guy called Ray Flynn down in Sligo, and Terry Hayes. They're people who have been hugely supportive to me over the years. And Jerry in particular is still a guy that I would meet very regularly. I'd be good mates with Jerry and bounce ideas off him. He's great for taking that sort of common sense approach to things. He would look at it in less scientific terms than I probably would at times, but he's a brilliant man just to bounce ideas off and get a common sense response on it. So he's brilliant. Another person that actually I would use quite a lot is Athletics Ireland have a mentor program for some of the coaches at the minute, and I've been paired up with Steve Vernon since 2019. And Steve has been brilliant. We would chat quite regularly on phone. He's obviously coaching athletes at a very high level, Kieran McGeehan and many other athletes who are competitive on the global stage. So again, he's a great man to, I suppose, if I'm putting training plans together, bounce those training plans off Steve and he'll give you a little bit of feedback. Maybe you could change this, maybe you could change that. And brilliant just getting an insight from a guy who's regularly dealing with athletes at global level. And he's been really beneficial. And even just, I suppose, where you pick up an awful lot of information, it's just chatting to other coaches within the sport. It's the people who are willing to exchange ideas, have a conversation about coaching. And no matter who you talk to within the sport, if you're talking for any significant period of time, you're always going to learn something off them. As long as you're listening, you will pick up something off it. So there's, chatting to other coaches around the country as well is a great way of picking it up. In terms of, I suppose, a support crew for me and the group that I'm coaching, I would always see the strength and conditioning people that I would work with over the years are an important support mechanism that I would lean on. In particular, people like Colin Griffin out in the sports, Santry Sports Clinic, he would deal with the strength and conditioning of an awful lot of the athletes within our group. And it's great to have somebody like that you can have faith in, and you can just say, right, you've got strength and conditioning requirements. You head off to Colin, and Colin will look after that. And we'll program it into your weekly plan then afterwards, but he'll look after the actual gym sessions and the specifics of that. And other people like, say, Kieran McDonough, he's a therapist based in Dublin. Kieran's great for just, again, if an athlete is injured, I know I can send them out to Kieran. They're in good hands, and he'll come back and he'll give you an exact diagnosis and how you can actually progress. But I suppose it's having a network of people like that. They're just two examples. There's plenty of other strength and conditioning people that I work with and plenty of other physios that we use. But it's good to have that network of people that you can say, right, off you go, talk to them. They'll give the diagnosis or what needs to be done here. And it's great to have that you can, have faith in people like that.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, it's what's the word? I suppose it's just supporting, you know, your ideas and giving sense to some of the things that you're seeing on the ground, in terms of whether it's, like, say, physiology, biomechanics, and certainly in terms of strength and conditioning, keeping our athletes robust and keeping that consistency you talked about earlier on.
We can't do everything. I think it's important as coaches that we realise that we can't do everything. You need to engage the services of other people from time to time.
I think you're right. The higher you go up the pyramid of performance, the more people are involved to help get them there. And if we've got that extra support, it just perhaps gives us time to focus on other areas where our expertise is more suited to the athletes. Yeah,
exactly.
The fourth question I've got here is thinking about competition and key areas for taping and peaking for competition. You got maybe 3 or 4 things that you would say that you do when you're peaking for a major competition?
Yeah, I suppose when it comes to the last 2 weeks leading into a race, particularly, I mean, over any distance, but I suppose I'm assuming an awful lot of people probably looking at this will be middle distance athletes who race track in the summer, cross country during the winter. I suppose my general approach within the final 2 weeks is the last really hard workout should be about 8 to 10 days before your target race. And that will be, in some cases, it might actually be another race. So if you're getting ready for a 1500, then maybe racing under distance the week before might be a good way of doing it. But if it's a training session, that would be a real peak session. So that would be one of your bells and whistles session. One of the sessions that you look back at the end of the season is this is a real test of where the athlete's fitness is at. So you're also trying to bring them to a peak, but you're also trying to test how fit they are and also trying to give them a little bit of confidence as they go into that last big event. You know, it's nice to see fast reps in training, good numbers in terms of heart rates and paces, wherever it might be. It's a really good confidence booster to have that. But I would always make sure that it's at least 8 to 10 days before the actual race itself, because very often if you're to measure lactates at the end of those workouts, they're probably harder than the actual race themselves, because you've got a series of repeats at a very high intensity and lactate is accumulating and accumulating. And they're very stressful. So therefore that big workout has to be done well back from the target race. And really once that's out of the way, you're gradually dropping down your volume into the race itself. What I would always do on race week, I mean, people have different ways of doing this, but my approach on race week would be that your last workout is on 4 days back from the race. So if people are racing on a Saturday, they'll do their last workout on a Tuesday. And what I would aim for with that Tuesday workout is a little bit of tempo on threshold stuff, but it's very much low end tempo. So it's just that maybe just above that first lactate turn point. Aerobic threshold is what I would refer to it as, but people have different terminology when it comes to those things. But that around that first lactate turn point, it's effectively maybe marathon pace or a little bit quicker, just accumulating a little bit of work where you're not necessarily accumulating lactate, but you're still getting a nice stimulus out of it. And then at the end of the workout, we'd tag on a couple of little reps that are at race pace or at race intensity. But again, they're quite short, so there's not a huge accumulation of lactate. So I suppose it's something I would avoid in the last 5 to 6 days before the race is avoid doing anything too stressful or too strenuous. And then the other thing is in the last 1 to 2 days beforehand, some athletes like to actually take a rest day and be really fresh coming into it. Other athletes don't necessarily like backing off and taking rest days too close to their actual target race, because it leaves them feeling a little bit flat. So that last 2 or 3 days before the race can be individual, but I'd always keep some strides in there. And the majority of the lads and ladies in our group will do maybe half an hour to 40 minutes the day before a race, but they'll also tag on 4 by 10 to 12 second hill sprints. So it's just getting that little bit of pop in the legs the day before the race, keeps the system primed, keeps the nervous system primed. And then, yeah, you get to race day, see what's in the engine at that point. Yeah,
well, I'm certainly looking at Dara at the 5K at this year's national championships. It worked a treat there. It was like poetry watching him finish that race.
It's funny, yeah. In hindsight, it looks great, but we done a workout probably 10 or 11 days before nationals, and at that stage he had been injured early in the summer. We knew he was fit, but we didn't know exactly what sort of top end shape, whether he was ready to race or not. So there was a workout that we'd done earlier in the year, 10 days before the National Indoor Championships, and we decided we'd pick that workout again 10 days before the Outdoor Championships, repeat it and see how it stacked up versus the one earlier in the year, because we knew when we'd done that workout he was in really good shape. it wasn't only done that workout that we actually made the decision, right, you're ready to go and run the national championships. And obviously 10 days later, he had an absolute stormer. But it's funny, people looking at that would say, oh, he must have had the perfect lead in. 10 days beforehand, we didn't know whether he was actually going to run the race or not. You know?
Yeah, no, that's right. I'm a great believer that there's no such thing as the perfect taper or the perfect preparation.
Yeah. And when you listen to, I mean, there's Dave Matthews a couple of years ago was on a coaching course with us, and Dave Matthews is the Irish 800 meter record holder. But it's interesting, he talked about the year that he broke the Irish 800 meter record, and he spent a huge chunk of the early part of that year aquajogging. He was injured. So I think he spent something like 4 or 5 weeks aquajogging. Obviously trained really hard, cross-trained really hard while he was injured. Popped out, got a couple of weeks of running under his belt and ended up running 1:44. And 25 years later is still the national record. It when you talk to athletes, you always envisage that big performances come off a perfect build-up. It's not always the case.
Yeah, that is an interesting story for sure. Maybe I'll get David Matthews on this and grill him on that one as well.
Yeah, it's an interesting, it's an interesting story to hear that it was far from the ideal season, and yet it was still the best performance of his life.
Yeah, and I believe Eilish McColgan these days, she does a lot more cross training than she used to, because she finds that if she does high volume miles, she breaks down. So she's only, perhaps in the 40 to 60 mile of running training, but she does a lot more cross training to aerobic benefits.
For every athlete, that threshold of how many miles you can run each week, that threshold is different. Like ultimately, you want an athlete to run as many miles as they can during the week, but you've got to get them to run as many miles as they can without getting injured and without breaking down, and making sure they're absorbing the training. So for some athletes, like take that Eilish McColgan example, it's 40 to 50 miles or 50 to 60 miles, and the rest is cross training. Other athletes will run 100, 110, 120 miles. They can do that week in, week out and never get injured. So again, it's figuring out the athlete that you're dealing with and tailoring the training to their needs, but ultimately that they're staying consistent through the year.
Absolutely, yeah. Everybody's an individual. We know that. We do know that.
Yeah.
Great answers. What about you as a coach? I mean, what do you do to, chill out? when you're not coaching. What's Emmett Dunleavy away from athletics? What do you do?
Well, as I was saying, I'm still training myself, so that's probably what I do to unwind as such. As I like doing my own training. I can't do as much running as I used to, so I probably run about 4 or 5 times a week. I do the rest on the bike, and really enjoy going out on the bike. Lucky enough to live, down near the Wicklow Mountains, so we do a lot of cycling up there at the weekends, and really enjoy that. But I suppose even away from sport, got a wife and 2 small kids. We've got Caden, who's 3, and Megan, who's 7 months. Great spending time with them at the weekends and just getting away from the sport. And sometimes, because, as I was saying earlier, when you're coaching and when you're coaching a big group of athletes, it is 24/7. So you're always on. But I like on a Saturday or Sunday, just switch off the phone for a couple of hours and head off, and we head up the hills for a walk and into some of the forests and just spend a bit of time with them, and just general relaxation. That's that, and maybe a couple of pints with the lads at the weekend when pubs are open, but that's not the case at the moment.
No, it's a great part of Ireland, Wicklow. Spent a good bit of time down there myself, so I can relate to you. I can envy you a little bit sometimes when I'm not out there.
Yeah, it's a lovely place.
Yeah, good for you. And that's been brilliant. And your answers have covered a lot, and I think the coaches listening to this will relate to it, and hopefully it will pick up plenty of gold dust. And I think you really have shared some key coaching points there that are going to help people move on. Thanks very much, Emmett Dunleavy.
Thank you.